Hey guys, welcome back to the Saints TV YouTube channel. Welcome to the round 3 match preview, where we take on Essendon. It's a massive game. It's Saturday, obviously the long weekend, Easter weekend. They're coming off a loss to the Sydney Swans, a pretty high scoring one. They kicked over 100 points. Sydney Swans just kicked over 130 points. So they were pretty good for the most part of that game. Very well documented the way they played in terms of their physicality and maybe their approach to the game, which will be very interesting. We'll talk about that a bit later. And then from our side, we're coming off a really exciting win against the Pies, which has kind of been hampered by news of injuries and suspensions in, I guess, the last 7 days since that game. It's felt like a very long time since we played. It's been a whole week already. We're getting a whole 9 days. Whereas I think Essendon are getting 6 or 7, and they travelled interstate to Sydney. Not that it's far, but there are a few little factors there. We're back at Marvel for the first time this season, which is great. It is not our home game. It's the Bombers' home game. General admission, I believe, is sold out, which is huge, so it's going to be a very big crowd. It always is against the Bombers. And we don't really go that well against the Bombers at Marvel Stadium. I just think of Spud's game a few years ago where we were primed to beat them. It was like, you know, an important game to potentially make finals. I think 2021 or 2, I can't remember. And we just got absolutely rinsed and we were just shocking all day. I just remember sitting up in the stands thinking, I don't know what I'm watching. But this time around, I'd like to think we're a little bit improved. Regardless of the players we got missing, and we'll talk about them very quickly now, but obviously from last week, we're not going to have Mason Wood, we're not going to have Liam Henry, and we're not going to have Max King, who failed to overturn his one-match suspension on his hit on Finlay McRae very late in the piece last week against the Pies. On the flip side, the Bombers are also going to be missing their giant up forward, 2 metre Peter Wright. He has been suspended for 4 games on his hit on Cunningham, the Sydney Swans player, which was a very controversial suspension for some people. I actually thought he'd get 3 or 4. That was kind of what I thought, so I'm not surprised at all with the way the AFL are going about things. I actually did think King could overturn his, but it is what it is. I think the good thing about us is, though, I think we've got depth, and I think this is the first week where we can really show it, especially with the players that could be returning. You know, we've got Dan Butler, who's a chance to come back in, Anthony Caminiti, who can come back in, Hugo Garcia, who played for Sandy on the weekend, had 14 tackles. He's a definite chance of debuting. Ari Schoenmaker had 33 disposals and 13 or 14 marks, and was one of the best, most influential players on the ground for Sandy as well last week. So he's another one that could come in as a sub. Zach Jones was the sub last week, so he's going to be elevated for sure into the starting lineup. Probably starts on the bench or maybe even in the guts. Him, Jack Steele, maybe Machida Owens or someone like that could be really useful. Windhager definitely, because of his form last week, was outstanding, and he'll be very valuable in this game. Maybe does he go on to a Parrish? Does he go to a Merritt? You know, Marcus Windhager on Zach Merritt. Geez, that'd be pretty juicy, to be honest, because he's in ripping form. The Essendon skipper, and I think they are going to retain Ridley. I think Jordan Ridley's going to come back. Redmond's not ready, and obviously Parrish I mentioned, who's going to play as well, most likely. So from us, there's no one else that's really a chance. Clark, Hayes, Dow, Howard, Brad Crouch. Obviously, he's a new one on the list. 6 to 8 weeks with his knee. Yeah, there's no other players outside of who I've mentioned that are really a chance to come in. So I think we kind of know what the changes are most likely to be. For the Bombers, I think the one thing that going into this game that bodes really well for me is, yes, they are actually scoring a lot more, the Bombers, and they're playing a quite free-flowing style of football. Jade Gresham last week was actually very, very good. I'll give him his flowers there. I thought he was good. I think he had like 20 disposals and 3 goals or something, although a few of them were just kind of, you know, easy ones out the back, but he still found himself in that position. I still think that on transition, that's where we're going to get them. I still think, regardless of our injuries, we have Sinclair, we have Bonner, we have Nasaya, we have Burns on a wing, we have Darcy Wilson on a wing, we still have Brad Hill on a wing, we still have Membry, Sharman, potentially Caminiti up forward, with Higgins, with maybe Butler, with Owens, with Filippo. I still think we've got a lot of weapons to really, really hurt them. Obviously, they do too, but I just think the fact that they went to Sydney, and I know it's a small ground and it's very hard to defend when, you know, it's one kick and you're basically in the goal square at the SCG, but they conceded over 131 points, over 130 points against the Swans. And then the week before, they beat Hawthorn, but they conceded 80-odd points. So their average against at the moment is roughly 14 goals, which, to me, I think, if they let us kick 14 goals, we're not letting them kick 12, you know what I mean? I don't see... I see this game as being quite similar to the Swans game for them, except take 3 or 4 goals off the Swans, but take 3 or 4 goals off Sydney, off Essendon, and I still think the margins around that 20... I still think we're probably a 20 to 30 point better team than the Bombers. Not in a disrespectful way, just I think we're a bit more advanced in our structure. I think that we, last week, really focused on defence, and you saw literally within the first month of the season, Ross Lyon had instilled that defensive focus for the team. Is it Brad Scott? Brad Scott, I think, was focused on defence in this offseason, according to a lot of Essendon fans. But in the first 2 weeks, we've not seen that at all. The second they turn the ball over, it's almost a guaranteed goal to the opposition. Statistically, they turn the ball over, it's a score for the opposition. And we scored a lot. We score a lot generally from turnover, but even last week against the Pies, we turn the ball over in the middle of the ground, we create a contest, and we break away fast, we end up scoring. And our efficiency going inside 50 this year has been significantly higher than previous. That was our issue last year, and that was the issue that I wanted us to amend this year to become a potential top 4 team, was we had no problems getting the ball really inside 50. It was kind of what happens when it gets inside 50. Now we're getting it in there, maybe a bit slightly more frequently, because our mids are just improving. You know, Jack Still's back to his best. Roll Marshall's an absolute beast. Machida Owens is going through there. Zach Jones coming through there. Windhager. There's players capable of winning clearances on their own now, which is really good. And we're turning it over inside 50 and getting scores 50 to 60% of the time in the first 2 weeks, which is very, very high. And I think that if the Bombers are going to try and take us on and try and play a run and gun style, they really need to be on point when it comes to running 2 ways. Because if we turn the ball over, we're going to slingshot it back very, very quickly at Marvel, under the roof. Slick, we love playing there. Not as much as I wish we were a bit more dominant there, but I think we're getting there. That's going to hurt them. But obviously on the flip side for us, the Bombers... their crowd's going to turn up. They're going to play a very attacking style of football. Their biggest strength that's going to combat us is their midfield. Obviously with Merritt, with Parrish, they've got these guys. Obviously the big one too is Draper and Goldstein. They've got the 2-pronged ruck, and I know that Rowe is the man, and I know I really back Rowe to take him on and do a good job, as he always does. He played on Grundy and Gawn last year, Rowe, and he had like record numbers. So he did very well. But it's just my little worry is, when Draper rests forward and when Goldstein goes in the ruck, do we put Rowe back? Do we put Rowe forward to have a chop out there? Do we put Machida Owens in the ruck? Because we did that last week. He played on Cox at times, did kind of well, roved the ball. Once it hit the deck, he didn't really compete in the air because he couldn't. Is that going to be the case this week? Do we risk bringing in a Campbell? Do we risk... changing the whole structure because they've got 2 rucks? I don't think Ross will. I think he'll back Rowe, and he'll back Rowe to take them on with the occasional chop out from Owens or Caminiti, because we know Caminiti can play ruck as well. So to me, I think it's the midfield that's a massive focus for me. I mean, I say that every week, but particularly this week, just because they've got the 2 rucks, they've got Parrish, who's a clearance beast, and they've got Zach Merritt, who's a very, very good footballer, and he knows how to... And if he has 30 possessions, we're in trouble, because 25 of them are really hitting the target, and he doesn't really go sideways that much anymore, especially with the new approach that Scott's put into them, is that go forward at all costs. That's a little bit of a worry. But the thing with me is I can say all I want about other teams' midfields and forward lines, but fact is I think in the last 12 months, I haven't really seen a forward line apart from maybe Adelaide's, last year in like round 9 or 10, really take hold of our back line. I think most of the time we've lost games because our midfields shat the bed, but our back line stood tall for enough time for us to win the game, but we didn't go and win the game. You know what I mean? Like the Geelong game. Our back line kept us in it long enough to potentially pinch that game, but we couldn't. But it wasn't our back line's fault that we lost. It was the rest of the ground's fault. So I think if our backline just does what it does on the weekend and we break even or get close to breaking even in the midfield, I think we win the game. If they get dominant in the midfield and they actually get scoreboard pressure on early, that's when you kind of panic a little bit. But I think the general vibe from the game, regardless of the injuries, regardless of not having King, because we've replaced him before, we missed him for a chunk of the early games last season, and we played very, very good football. It made us even more unpredictable. No one knew where the goals were coming from, and that was before Membry and Sharman really had the form that they've got now, and our youngsters are significantly better. Windhager looks like he can take a game by the scruff of the neck. Nasai Wanganeen-Malira can just end a game with his right foot. Machida Owens, definitely the form we want from him from last week. More in the guts. No surprise he improved. And I reckon Filippo, potentially a chance this week with no King to play him a bit deeper. Get him out of the midfield because it hasn't really worked just yet. And just let him kick his 2 or 3 goals, get his form up, and that could be a massive difference because he can run, he can jump, he can rove. He's quick off the mark in the 5 to 10 metres, and he's got a beautiful left foot in front of goal and hardly misses. So I think that's an opportunity there, but we'll see what happens. But the general vibe is pretty confident, really excited, hopefully a big crowd. The Bombers are definitely a team that are going to be looking at us and thinking we're around the same mark as them, and they want to take us off. But these are the games if we want to get to that top 4, top 6 and maintain that rage, going into Richmond next week and then the Giants and then the Dogs, couple of big games. We need to be beating the Bombers. And I don't really care how we beat them, but as long as we beat them, I'll be happy. So put in the comments, let me know your predictions, Saners. What are you looking forward to? What are you worried about? I'll respond to those when I can. The live review will be post-game, obviously, Saturday night. So stay tuned for that on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube live. And yeah, like the video as well. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you very, very soon. But until then, enjoy the rest of your week. And as always, go you mighty Saints. See you guys.